Hello and welcome to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. My name is Tolly Botts. My co-host here is Aaron Terrell, and today we are joined by a guest called Fel. Fel Void is what she goes by online. And Fel is a self-identified autoandrophile. Some of you may recognize Fel from Phil Illy's channel. I think you were one of the early interviews in his auto hetero files, if I
think I was the first one.
Okay, there you go. Awesome. So if people haven't checked that out already, they should. But since it's been a little while since that interview, we figure we might have you go through your story a little bit again. And
Sure.
Then something of particular interest that we want to talk about with you is just the sort of very transient lesbian identity that seems to be really prevalent among autoandrophilic females, and whether that persists and whether that even comes with relationships with women or not. There does seem to be a period of time where autoandrophilic females either consider for themselves if they might be a lesbian, or the people around them are questioning, is this young girl a lesbian? And so I want to talk about that a little bit, even though it's not a huge part of your story. But without further ado, welcome, Fel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right. So do you want to tell us maybe when you first encountered autoandrophilia, or and sort of when it first, in hindsight now, when it first showed up in your life?
So I think I first encountered the word on a Wikipedia article in the early aughts. That was back when you could say those words on Wikipedia. And it was just a list of paraphilias, just kind of all thrown together. And already, like at 14, 15, I was already like really keen on figuring out what all this stuff was. And I just saw autoandrophilia and I was like, okay, love of oneself as a man. That sounds about right. I told my mother when I was 12 that I wanted to be a gay boy.
Wow.
So it's been a part of me since, I mean, I could verbalize it at like as early as 12. And I think looking back, it's kind of hard without, retconning, but some behaviors seem like they could have been like early, like kind of a masculine embodiment. Forgive me for the phrasing. But there was one story when I was about 2, still being potty trained, and my mother walked in on me peeing, standing up into the toilet. And she was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm peeing like daddy." And I don't know what I was thinking back then, but I know if I was doing it now, what I'd be thinking.
Yeah.
And that's probably the earliest, but maybe that could have been just a kid thing.
Right.
But then as I got a little older, like 4, 5, 6, my mom would notice that I would get attached to fictional characters and I would emulate them, but it was always a male character and it was always the bad guy. So I had a stint where I wasn't allowed to watch The Grinch anymore because I would, like, 5-year-old me would go into Grinch mode. And that was my early masculine embodiment fantasy, was I'm going to act like the Grinch.
I'm going to steal Christmas. That's great.
Now, when you say that you weren't allowed to watch it anymore, I'm imagining when you would get into Grinch mode, it would be like hard for your parents to snap you out of it, type of thing. So like it wasn't worth it to allow you to get into that headspace, or am I misreading?
I'm not sure exactly how that played out. I remember it really vaguely. But
Sure.
I do remember having a crush on the Grinch, probably the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. I remember absolutely in preschool, absolutely like ripping apart like an entire playroom pretending that I was the Beast. Boy, did I get in trouble for that.
So
Go ahead.
it's just interesting to kind of sit on the whole villain character, because it sounds like your mom kind of clued into the fact that you were always, wanting to embody the bad, what's the word, the villain in the story, and that was
Yeah.
probably more concerning to her and what she noticed more than the fact that they were also always male characters.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. The way she would say it is, you always wanted to be the it, but it was always a male it, like the monster, but it was always a man monster.
Right.
So I'm wondering, you said you encountered the term in a list of paraphilias on Wikipedia somewhere around 14. Is that right?
I think
So,
14 or 15. Yeah.
okay. So like adolescence, you were a teenager, you were somewhere in the beginning of high school.
Yeah.
Were you searching this out? Like, do you remember at all what you were putting in, what you were trying to find? Were these things like, were you trying to make sense of secret sexual feelings that you had, or?
I think by that point I was already so interested in sex as a topic that I was probably just looking up, oh, these are interesting paraphilias. Oh, wait a minute, this one sounds really familiar.
Okay. So this was like a special interest.
Yeah.
Sex was a special interest.
Yep. From age 10, actually.
Okay. And so I guess one aspect that we're missing here is that you are also diagnosed with autism.
Yep.
And so to call it a special interest kind of has like a meaning there too.
Yep. I was formally diagnosed in 2001.
And how old were you at the time?
Pardon?
How old were you?
11.
Okay. Do you remember the sort of when your like physical sexual feelings came online?
10.
Okay. So about the same time. So you had your sexuality was kind of awakening, and then you took a sort of intellectual interest and had a curiosity about sex and sexuality.
Yeah. It hit hard, and I was like, oh my God, I got to figure all of this stuff out.
Okay.
So like when you first started having those sexual feelings, it was always in the context of having a male body. Is that correct?
I tried for a little while to imagine myself as female, and it just didn't feel right. It was really uncomfortable, and it felt like kind of surreal. Like, on what planet would this ever happen? I had to take myself out of the equation entirely. So I did try for a while, but it just didn't work. It wasn't particularly arousing. It was just kind of like, I like this in theory because I'm imagining intimacy with a boy that I like, but this part where I have to be myself. Ugh.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think just like notably too, this is perhaps I'm stating the obvious here, but I think people will hear stories like this and attribute it to, all young girls are uncomfortable with their changing bodies and stuff like that. But it is
Interesting, because I was never necessarily uncomfortable with the way I was developing. It just always
didn't
I think
work
there's
for
a
you
lot
sexually.
going on. There's like a lot of layers there.
Well, that is interesting. And I was going to say, right. So a lot of people I think will have that response, or that they might be thinking that, like, well, okay, that's not so atypical that when you thought about your own body involved, it grossed you out. But I think what's key there, and Aaron and I haven't really dwelled on this so much lately, but we talked about this a lot at the beginning of the show, like, but you didn't want to look like a more perfect, more beautiful woman.
Yep. That's
wanted-
the thing. It's like, if it was just self-esteem, why didn't I imagine
Right.
I was a prettier woman? Doesn't.
Right.
And I
Right.
tried imagining that, and I was just like, oh, this is not any better. This is now I'm just an unrelatable character in my own sexual narrative. It's just bleh. It was
and that's
always
that's especially interesting too, that you say that you weren't particularly uncomfortable with the way that your body was changing. It's just like it didn't do it for you. Like you couldn't, like you couldn't access that sexual part of yourself. Imagining
I just
yourself.
couldn't relate to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do wonder how that plays into the trajectory of the rest of your sort of development with regards to dysphoria, right? Like it sounds like you'll share, what experiences you've had with dysphoria, but perhaps that was a protective factor against, developing more crippling dysphoria, is that the development of your body was like maybe ambivalent towards, right? But not intensely negative feelings.
Yeah. It was just kind of like, eh.
I think your experience of AAP is especially interesting because it is you understand it to be so specifically tied to sex. Like it's just that's the only realm where it's really relevant, and it's overwhelmingly relevant, which is quite interesting, I think, because you don't seem to have that experience of kind of generalized dysphoria that follows you, and they didn't even you weren't upset about your developing body. It was just like sexually this is uninteresting. Which is quite fascinating, and it is how plenty of males actually will experience autogynephilia, where it's like, I don't mind being a guy, but there's just nothing sexy about it, which is kind of what it sounds like your experience is as well.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's just interesting when we think about this as like in the ETLE framework, that it's just like the response to yourself is just to someone you're not very attracted to. It's like, because you're not very attracted to women, right? And so it's like, luckily it doesn't disgust you, and maybe that could also be sort of the female less target specificity thing, although you do seem much more inclined towards males. But it's like seeing your own body, it's not this pervasive disgust, but it's just like, I'm not into that. That doesn't that doesn't do it for me.
Yeah. And the only time I think I'm generally more like
I'm here. But,
hello. Probably more Euphoria motivated, but I mean at some point, if you can't function sexually without an AAP stimulus, is it really that easy to just say this is just Euphoria versus dysphoria? It's like, if I can't function without imagining myself having a penis, that's a problem. Like, it's not all fun and games, and
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Yeah, it's not. I talk a lot about like the push, which like the push to transition being dysphoria, and the pull to transition being euphoria. And it sounds like you definitely fall more into the category of the pull to transition and not the push. But like you're saying, it's like, if you cannot sexually function with the anatomy that you actually have, it's like, that's not just an exciting fantasy that you it's like it is really pervasive in your life and relationships, I imagine. So it's not fair to dismiss it as like, it's just you chasing euphoria, when it's a case of it being necessary to have a fulfilling sex life.
Exactly.
Is important.
And I'm just thinking along those same lines, it's this conversation is just bringing me back to some of the earlier conversations that Aaron and I had on the navel gaze, and how this component of basically obligate autosexuality, obligate autogynephilia, or obligate autoandrophilia feels important, you know. And so, like you're saying, even for someone who doesn't experience, let's say, so much of the push and the dysphoria, it's pretty serious that to have any type of sexual gratification or sexual presence, you need to kind of tune your body out, right? You need to
Yep.
dissociate in some way, or like really channel something else.
Yeah.
That's pretty significant. And it's interesting, we can acknowledge that in your case where there is not all this dysphoria, and yet we kind of have a hard time acknowledging that how significant that is in the case of people who have dysphoria, right? So they want to de-emphasize the sexuality, especially because for them that really is probably not the driving force in so many ways, right? They are perhaps much more driven by these push factors, by the autogyna or autoandrophobia, right? And all of that. But it's really significant if someone can only be sexually present if they imagine themselves as the opposite sex. Like that feels like not something to pass over so quickly, and really significant for the people, sort of whether or not they're experiencing more pervasive dysphoria.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yep.
I agree.
Because I have that same relationship with sex myself, but I also have, and it seemed, and I was also always so much more aware of the kind of chronic autogynophobia, just repulsion to my female body was always so much more, chronic and constant. And I've said before, I'm fairly low libido, especially, not on testosterone. And so it was very easy to not even really even notice, the sexual aspect so much. But yeah, when I, get into the actual, what's going on psychologically for me sexually, yes, absolutely, being male is obligatory. But yeah, anyways, just not something that I picked up on as being, like how all the trans activists will say, well, of course I need to, imagine I'm the gender I need to be in order to, I never thought about it in those terms, but that's essentially what I was thinking, it never occurred to me that like this is a sexual experience essentially for that reason.
Yeah, and that is the dreaded overlap that people don't want to acknowledge. That's the people who want to draw the very clear lines between the crossies, right, and the transvestites and the true transsexuals, don't want to acknowledge that they share this critical aspect. It's just the other things that are different, right? And how far people choose to go with the transition that really separates them. But it is right at the base. You're acknowledging that same process going on.
Yep. One thing that speaking of like the whole like libido element, in your conversation with Phil, you were saying how essentially you are really aware of your autoandrophilic, well, obviously that is your sexuality, but it's much more intense. And you talk about having that whole mental shift when you are at a certain point in your cycle that aligns with the normal female biological drive, which was really fascinating. If you want to talk some more about that.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of feel like I'm channeling my archetype when I'm when it's the week after my period and everything's just online and ready to go. And there's it's a good feeling. It's more confident. It's more it's flirtatious. Depending on what I can get away, like I'm very much monogamous in real life, so the best I'll do is like flutter my eyelashes at someone, but like if it's
scandalous, Phil. Scandalous.
So but if I'm like, online in a role play, that's where I can really channel it, and the archetype is really very promiscuous. And so, I mean, that's one aspect of it that I have to keep, you know, in role play only, but it's there. Although it wouldn't really translate well to real life because the anatomical differences are too great. It's like, even if I could just walk up to a guy and be like, "Hey, handsome," it's like, what am I gonna do with what I got? Like, it's empty, you know? But yeah, that definitely it corresponds to my cycle, like, every time. Every time.
And sorry, you kind of just said something that triggered my brain to go in a different direction, which is this kind of, it makes so much sense that dysphoria or these opposite sex identifications can become so much stronger now in the internet age, where you're able, like, prior to this, there wouldn't have been an outlet for you to be online, basically living out this character. You would have to just kind of, sorry, my dog is yelling at other dogs. You would have to kind of just kind of deal with what nature gave you and incorporate that into your relationships, etc. Depending on how desperate or lack or not desperate you were. But now in this age, we again have this luxury, or maybe not a luxury, of really like indulging this part of our brain and this part of our sexuality that again is kind of a mixed bag as far as, oh, this nice fun outlet, but then also it can create, you know, the dysphoria of disassociation and embody or imagining or kind of living out this fantasy virtually. But sorry, that was kind of a side tangent from what we were talking about. That it is, just very interesting. Yeah, when
I do
ovulation,
have a big opinion on that. I have a very I think that I feel like if I hadn't found the internet and chat rooms where I can just play a male character, I never would have really stumbled upon like actually being sexually satisfied. I would have assumed that I was like frigid or something, or that something was wrong with me, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't really have much to lean on. And I feel like it's possible that maybe that's why Dr. Blanchard didn't pick up on a lot of this, because as women, we're going to be quieter about it. We don't have testicles to make it, you know, life ruining. We'll just, you know, and we don't have to maintain erections to facilitate, you know, sex. We can just kind of lay there and do our job just fine and just not be happy about it. I think as women, it's very easy to just, I mean, what's the stereotype of the frigid woman, you know?
Way back and Think of England.
Yeah.
Or whatever the slogan is.
Yeah. I think that that's probably, I mean, in my opinion, that is a big reason why there weren't so many women presenting to clinics, is to fulfill your role as a wife. You don't have to be particularly aroused. You can get by just getting by. You can still have babies. I mean, that's reductive, but you get what I'm saying. Is
Completely.
Our biological role does not necessitate our arousal. That was wacky. There you go.
No, that's true, and that's kind of deep. And I think that in some ways that's obvious, and maybe people can access it better with an analogy that I'm familiar with of like women. We can call them lesbians, we can call them bisexuals. I know people get really particular about these labels for women, and I don't really care. But women who end up with women who end up with a strong sexual emotional preference for other women will describe who they will date men earlier on, you know, because that's kind of what you do, and they're not like repulsed and disgusted by men, right? And they have whatever. And then when they experience, you know, have a sexual experience with a woman, it's like things come online for them in a similar way to what I'm hearing you say of like when you access that part of the autoandrophilia, right? When you said like, okay, what happens if I'm the man here, and you allowed yourself to go down those roads, that really is your sexuality, like Aaron said.
Yeah.
But these women are like living before that. They're not necessarily in some horrid closet, right? They're not like dying slowly inside, and yet when they have the sexual experience that is so arousing and gratifying, it's like, oh, it's like night and day. Like this is what this could be like, right?
Yep.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and then I think too what Aaron said, there's a blessing of living in our time. There's lots of blessings of living in our time, but also okay, sorry, this is all live, so I'm going to try to spit this out coherently. But when you were first explaining it too, I was wondering, right, like what are the potential negative side effects here, right? Of like, is it dangerous to a relationship? You know, there's these competing drives within you, right? There's like your sort of erotic ideal, or the things that are most satisfying to you sexually and maybe emotionally, and then there's also the part of you that's like just living entirely in reality, that is like, you know, even if I could be this promiscuous man, right, like I won't even be able to do it in the way that I want to, right? Like even if I can guess a man, I won't be able to woo him, you know, sexually and physically in the way that I want to. And so I wonder how much like feeding it could potentially set someone up for disappointment in a way, right? It's like you kind of know that you'll never get what you ultimately want. But then there is the flip side of it, which is, but before you kind of leaned into this, you weren't really online sexually, right? There was no like, there was no real satisfaction anyway. So it's a rock and
Yeah.
a hard place.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22. I just keep it compartmentalized because
Yeah.
I don't have persistent dysphoria. So if it's
Right.
time for me to, you know, get into an erotic headspace, I can do that and then just come out of it when I'm done. And that works okay for me. I mean, it's not perfect, but
Right.
it does function like popsicle sticks held together with bubble gum, but it does get me through, you know. And I think from an early age I realized that there is not going to be an opportunity for me to physically have what I want, because I've been looking at like phalloplasty since I was 14, and I was like, no, that's terrifying. And no shade to anyone who has it or wants it, but it's it wouldn't give me what I want. It's very much anatomical, but also physiological. If I can't have erections, I'm not that interested in, you know.
Yeah.
Fair. What you were or what you were getting at with the whole like the rock and a hard place, and I have been discouraged, or I will say, you know, like if you have non-auto sexual fantasies
Right.
that you can lean into those, because I'm kind of like constantly in this headspace that if you give over to that kind of, you know, chronic sexuality, it's going to result in gender dysphoria. But Fel, you are here, you're in your 30s, obviously you've, you know, been, you know, you sexually developed at a young age, so you've been like, this has been your primary sexuality for what, the last 2 decades at least, it sounds like, and you do not have gender dysphoria to this date. It's just how your sexuality works. It's what you tap into, and then you just go live your life as a woman without any I mean, yeah, your sex life is not as, stellar as you'd like it to be because of, the
Natural
lacking in,
limitations.
yeah, just physical biological limitations. But it's like you're able to just confine it just to the erotic, and it doesn't follow you into regular life with like this crippling dysphoria. So yeah, I just think that's kind of really hopeful for a lot of other people who might have this concern about trying to squash this terrifying part of their sexuality that could result in debilitating dysphoria, when that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
I think for me it was particularly easy to just write off letting it go any further, because I know I can never medically get what I want. But for someone who might be able to, I have a lot of empathy there, because that's got to be. It's not as tempting for me because I know it's not going to give me what I want. But for someone who it would,
Mm. Yeah. I almost wanted to put a question mark at the end of what Aaron just said, because I guess I'd want to ask you, like, when has dysphoria shown up for you, and like when, and what did that look like, and how did you kind of deal with that?
It's rarely completely about sex. I like, if I was going to be a man, I want to be a slim man. I don't want to be a fat guy. I don't want to look like my dad. And it's just not in my genetics to look. So it's my weight, but also, what woman doesn't take issue with being a little chubby?
Right.
So it's kind of hard to call that dysphoria just on its face.
Right.
The fact that I can never penetrate someone, I mean, yeah, strap on, blah, 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 not the same. That's upsetting. It's
Right.
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
To want that so bad and know that I can never have that. It's like, that's a bummer. And I try not to dwell on that too much, because that thought really doesn't help me at all. But it is there. And for strictly sexual things, it's mostly about, I don't have a penis. I don't hate my vulva, but what am I going to do with that? Nothing I want. Yeah.
I don't know if this is too personal. Like, what is your sex life? What is your sex role? Maybe that's a more appropriate question, even though we're getting in muddy waters either way.
I've been with a heterosexual man for 6 years, and we make it work, just the regular stuff you'd expect from a heterosexual couple. But I kind of have to dissociate when I'm there. Not because I hate it. It's nothing to do with that. He's wonderful.
Right.
It's just that I don't have a penis, and this is not sexy to me. Being penetrated is not, it feels good, but it's not stimulating. I also have to, like, foreplay does not work. I have to sit and watch porn for 20 minutes before I can engage. 9 times out of 10, I have to have foreplay that is just me alone with some porn. And that's sad, but also I don't know any other way to make it work.
Is that because basically the warming up of your body that's not your body, is not what you want in this encounter, basically?
Yeah. It's like all the normal foreplay stuff is just kind of I get frustrated and bored. And it's not a physical thing, because physically it's like,
Right.
yeah, this would be nice if I was into it, but I'm just like, no.
So you said you're comfortable with anything, so I'll just keep going until you're not comfortable.
Go ahead.
Because I'm curious about this for a couple of reasons. I mean, I posted a poll recently on Twitter about like porn and masturbation because I'm curious about people's habits with that.
Mhm.
And it's always in this weird, like, how much do we self-disclose?
Mhm.
But so I'm wondering, like, I guess one question I have for you is like during the foreplay or things like you said, what would be typical foreplay? I'm hearing that it's intellectually, or that's the wrong word, but like cognitively, mentally, boring, maybe awkward, like, you know, like this is like these are things that you do to a woman, and to me being a woman is not sexy, so I don't know how that's supposed to set the mood. And is your body, are you physically becoming aroused? Because foreplay to me is like or what it's supposed to be is the very literal, like, I think it's like warming up the oven, you know, it should be like
Mhm.
building a arousal. So is that physiologically happening or no?
Slow, like really slowly, to the point where the frustration sets in long before the warm up has actually happened.
Right.
I'm just like, this is so boring. Let me just climb on top and, you know. And
Yeah.
and also, if I don't get the porn, 9 times out of 10, I will not have an orgasm. So, you know, you can, I mean, oral fingering, you could do that till you're blue in the face, but it's not going to get me where I need to be to have an orgasm. I've tried.
Mm-hmm.
and it's nothing to do with technique. It is not.
Right.
He, my fella's not bad at what he's doing. It's just,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm making an assumption here. Still correct me if I'm wrong. The type of porn that you're consuming before having sex is male on male porn, or
Not
well,
always.
I guess there's other things that you're that you're into too. Which
It's
yeah.
you. I mean, male, female is the most, accessible.
Mhm.
So I use plenty of that, but it's pretty specific, and I'm always projecting as the man.
Right. Right.
Um, male. There's a lot of anal involved, and I'm not super into that
Into
either.
that.
So,
That makes
um,
total sense. The question I should have asked is how are you self-inserting, but you answered that. Yeah. So kind of whatever you're watching, it's the man that you're self-inserting as.
whoever whoever is using his penis is the one I'm inserting as. Inserting.
I know. I thought that too while I was saying it. um, yeah, this is really interesting. So basically, again, this is so personal, but so you need to kind of watch something if there's any chance of you finishing and even really getting properly warmed up, for lack of better terms. So are
Mhm.
you basically staying in that headspace?
Yeah, for the most
What's
part, unless something more interesting comes into mind, but usually it's uh whatever headspace like the porn put me in.
Mhm.
Um so yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's really interesting. And I think we have all different types of people who watch this show. So I think there could be different reactions happening right now, but I'll run
Mhm.
through a couple of them. Um,
Mhm.
I think one would be like some level of pity is the wrong word, but like sympathy. And you're thinking like, well, this doesn't sound very fulfilling
Mhm.
in like, you know, or it sounds complicated, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I guess the flip to that, I'm answering my own question here, is kind of like we were saying before, like, okay, yes, it's not entirely ideal. There is this level of sort of like dissociation that needs to happen for you to be like able to be present for the physical, the positive physical sensations and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But like, what's the alternative? You just, it's like you could choose not to watch the porn before so that you can have a great orgasm at the end. So the alternative is just not really experiencing much pleasure. So I guess even though what you're doing now is complicated, more complicated than what would be ideal, it's still at least there is adult sexual satisfaction that comes on the other end of it. So I think that's
Yeah,
yeah.
that's kind of where my therapist wants me to focus on, is that it's still relatively functional, even if there's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Right.
And I just have to, you know, deal with the hand that I'm dealt.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that like Twitter poll that I posted, it sounds like you're saying like you're in good company, I think, to a certain extent, because the question that I asked is for people who watch porn as part of their masturbation process. I asked basically, like, do you need to watch it all the way through the act of masturbation, which I think we could go with that, as well as like, do you need to keep it in mind entirely, right? Like in that
Mhm.
situation through completion, or are you watching it as essentially foreplay, as something to warm you up, and then and then the masturbation act is separate? And the majority of males and females who responded said that they need to watch porn all the way through to maintain arousal for completion. And so it seems like a decent amount of people, granted that was masturbation, so that's perhaps it would be different, right, for partnered sex. um but yeah, there are other people too who kind of need that other, right, that other story, or that external, I guess,
Mhm.
stimulus, yeah, for it to be a successful uh experience.
I mean, I also enjoy like fantasy, but I consider porn as kind of like a brute force approach to getting aroused. It's like we have to do this in a timely fashion. You just
Totally.
just watch it, and it is the most intense and stimulating thing that you have. So it's uh it works and it's fast. It's not necessarily always the most satisfying, but it does the job.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you there. Like I kind of joke like gosh, I always self-disclose too much, but that like there's a lot of like I can find things very arousing in just like TV shows that I watch or movies, but that is kind of the long way even to do it, right? And so porn
Mhm.
to me too is very much the like we can just get to the arousal really quickly because there's just gonna like you skip all the other stuff and then there's just like naked bodies that you're attracted to. And so it is, yeah, let's get really quickly to the point here. And at a certain point it is like, well, what's uh yeah, why do it the hard way?
Yeah.
um yeah. Oh, you're muted, Aaron.
Oh, whoops. I was just saying it's the extra strength dose.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so did you have something?
Yeah, I'm curious about because with you, so it's kind of like you're sort of like in a different like you said, kind of like disassociating, right? Like this, in order for sex to be sexy, it's like a different kind of sex that you're having mentally.
Yeah.
So, and you did mention a bit about like a metasexual attraction to women.
Mhm.
Is there any sort of temptation there where, like, even though no, you would not have that actual physical anatomy of having a penis to penetrate with, but you could be having sex that's a simulation of that essentially? Like, is there any, like, have you ever experimented in that regard, or is that much of a temptation, or
Um,
how's that for you?
I've I've been with a woman once, and it was hard to actually know what I was feeling. I was on way too much Lexapro and also like in a full-blown eating disorder at the time. So nothing was arousing. Everything was just completely numb. So I would have liked to try it again, but I've already settled down.
Right.
I do think about it every now and then, more in the context of like other kinks, not necessarily, because I mean I still don't have a penis, so even if I did have a simulation, with a woman, it still wouldn't be the same. But I am still kind of interested, in theory.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Like you're saying that frustration that sexual frustration would still exist, because for you, it's very much having the real thing. And it comes back to what you said earlier, that like, that's why it's been easy to keep transition off the table for you, because you don't want to approximate maleness. You want to have a working penis, basically, and be a man. It's not just you don't want to necessarily be, well, I don't know necessarily. You don't necessarily want to be like a gynandromorph, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily keep the boobs and have penis unless you would, which would be very interesting. We can get into that. But it's really about functionally and really being a man.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've definitely considered a gynandromorph body. That was my first successful masturbatory fantasy.
Wow.
Yep.
Why am I somehow not surprised? Okay.
I was obsessed with Futanari. I mean, yaoi too, but also Futanari as like a teenager.
What is that, Futanari?
That's the anime chicks with dicks. And so it is appealing, but I being a man is more central. Being a woman with a penis it feels more like a compromise. So both are more appealing than what I have now.
Sorry, I have to ask, Tali, you said that you weren't surprised. I did not see that coming. So I'm wondering what did you clue into that I was not clued into?
Nothing about Fell in particular, honestly. Just like right when I said it out loud, I was like, except no, this would totally be. I've heard of other AAPs who are interested in having the gynandromorph body, right? Who are interested in gynandromorphs and would be interested in having the gynandromorph body. And yeah, AAPs who want to be MTFs, basically, who want to be read as MTFs even. So yeah, like once I said that you don't want that, I was like, hold on, I should open that back up, because you totally might actually be into that. So it wasn't anything about you in particular, but yeah, I was just like, wait, this actually is a thing. So I need to leave the door open for that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. And it brings into, it just brings up that if we want to call it partial or how we want to refer to it, but yeah, it is that kind of general autosexual, kind of, we can mix up the target into being the halfway version, right? And so, yeah, I don't know if you want to call that paraphilic substitution, but I know somewhere along the way in my transition journey, being an androgynomorph, is that the word? Yes. Became sometimes more appealing than being an actual man. And so I think there is some sort of, is it a mental protective measure or whatever that we can, are happy with the halfway thing?
I think it's good. Yeah.
Right. And that's, like just the AGPs, or like say the AGAMPs, who are, find it more desirable to be a trans woman than to be an actual woman. It's like they do seem to be, well, they can be much more obnoxious in real life, but as far as like the, mentally healthy, because, they're able to make peace with an anatomy that others aren't able to make peace with. So yeah, if you can, I think that's always the better way to go.
And we've been hypothesizing about this a little bit, but I don't know how clean the break is between the AGP and the AGAMP and the AAP and the AAGMP. Because like you said, it's like for some of them, the whole time their preferred erotic ideal may have been the morph, but for others, I think it is a process. It's downstream of the AGP or the AAP, where it's like coming into, it's a compromise with reality, kind of like what you said, Phil. It's like, well, I'm more likely, I'm closer to being, a penis, a woman with a penis than I am to being a man, right? And so if I can eroticize that, that's good. And substitution perhaps is also a good word, but I'm not convinced that it's always like that means that was your first underlying attraction, right, to begin with.
Yeah,
that does seem like a good thing.
Yeah.
So I want to go down the meta road a little bit, but before that, I'm curious how much your partner understands about your inner sex world.
I try not to get into too much detail with him. He's kind of reserved.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'd probably make him pretty uncomfortable with a lot of stuff. So I tend not to go in the weeds with him about it. He doesn't seem overly curious. I think it's because he knows if he starts probing those depths, something scary is going to come out and bite him. So he's just kind of like, nope, just not going there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fair because I'm also pretty sadistic, and he knows that, and it scares him. So we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in it to make him uncomfortable. Would I like for him to understand better? Absolutely. Do I understand why he gets skittish? Yeah, I do. And it's no fault of his.
Mm-hmm.
You say you're pretty sadistic, but you don't want him to be uncomfortable?
I would say there's a pretty big difference between the unethical sadist and the ethical sadist. In real life, I draw a very hard line where if I love someone, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. Usually. But if I don't like someone, that kind of protective empathy kind of goes out the window, and I'm just like, yeah, you know what? Let me make you as uncomfortable as I can. But I mean, if I love him and I want to keep him around, I cannot afford to be making him sexually uncomfortable.
No, yeah, of course. I was mostly just joking. It was like a nice sentence there to play at.
Yeah. It was a very fun, fun sentence there. Maybe a little more directly then, does he know that you imagine yourself as a man sexually?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he knows. I don't think he knows that it's most of the time.
Right. But he knows that's part of it for you.
Yeah, but he knows of it. And I was thinking about getting him to read part of Phil's book, but I haven't gotten that far yet.
It's probably not a bad idea. Okay, so these are all really kind of different directions, but I want to know when when you realized that this AAP, these sexual feelings were related to this phenomenon of trans?
I think once I started frequenting like online chat rooms around 16, 17, I had already been like kind of role playing, pretending that I was a man whenever I post on like old bulletin board systems. But it wasn't until I hit the chat rooms where I think I started coming around the terms like trans man and being like, oh yeah, okay, that's me. So that was something that I adopted probably around 17.
Calling yourself a trans man.
Yeah.
Interesting. Was this pretty exclusively online, or did you take it into your real life at all?
I tried to take it into real life, but I was very obviously not a man. Like there was not even androgynous, just big and doughy and womanly. And so it really didn't garner much respect, because I mean it was like 2007. I wasn't a lesbian. I wasn't even particularly masculine in my personality. I mean, I had a few quirks, but
Right.
not manly, not by any stretch. Just weird and also pretty feminine. So it didn't. No one respected it.
Right.
So around 2000, you said this was around 2007. It's interesting when you say, yeah, you were seeing that term trans man, identifying with it online, realizing that was a good descriptor for you. But then also you just said that you weren't a lesbian. Was that part of what you were thinking at the time? Is like, how can I be a trans man if I'm not a lesbian? Because I know that was certainly a big hang up of mine. And this was just in 2011 when I was kind of, or 10, I would say, when I was first encountering the possibility. But for me, it was kind of like, it's like, how can I be a trans man if I'm not a lesbian? It seems like one pretty much always preceded the other. And so, or at least in my cursory high level understanding. And so it seemed like I was kind of like this weird appropriator or something. Did you have any kind of reservations like that? Did you feel like, oh, this is something that the extreme lesbians are, or not?
It crossed my mind, although I don't suppose it stopped me. It certainly made it garnered less respect. It feels less valid if the person is saying I'm a man, but I'm a gay man. It's like,
What's the point?
yeah. So it
Straight with extra steps or whatever. Yeah.
yeah. And so it was more that I always felt like, because I wasn't that into women, that's part of why it just kind of got laughed off. For me myself, I mean, I guess I was calling myself bisexual for a long time. But in my adulthood, I really think it's closer to heterosexual, but auto heterosexual. I think most of my attraction to women is meta, with maybe some exceptions. But it's so hard to tell.
Yeah, and I think there's so much I want to go with here. In our most recent interview with Taff, she said something that I agree with, which is like, it's not so important to disentangle what is meta attraction from what is naturally occurring within you attraction, right? As long as like you have an understanding of the autosexuality, right, and have like honesty and whatever with your partners and stuff, that really is all that matters. And you know, with females, it's going to be hard. It's it's harder to tell, let's say, than it is with males. We don't have the same parts to give us like the clear signals necessarily. So I don't know that it matters whether, like you said, if those few exceptions are true, authentic bisexuality, or if they are downstream of your autosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really interesting, like I said at the top of the show, that there was a short period of time where you wondered if you were a lesbian, basically, and thought like maybe that's what makes the most sense of what my feelings and experiences are.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also really interested that I knew that was short-lived, but I'm interested that your identification as bisexual was longer. Especially because, like you're saying, you're pretty self-aware about the fact that it's really men that you're into. It's like mostly males that you're into, so much so that being with a woman partner doesn't really do that much for you, because you couldn't even, in that scenario, you still wouldn't be male enough, right? Or like entirely male. But so it's interesting that you considered yourself bisexual for so long. And yeah, I wanna get into that, because as you know, right, there's a big push for a framing of like all of these people, that trans is an inherently homophobic movement because it preys on gays and lesbians and bisexuals, and some people will begrudgingly count bisexuals in there, but it seems like a lot of the people that we're calling gays and bisexuals, they're not even necessarily calling themselves that. They're calling themselves bisexual. And then what does that really mean when we break it down? So as best as you can, like what was in your, if you can get into that headspace, why were you calling yourself bisexual? Why did you feel like you were bisexual and not just straight?
I get a lot of enjoyment out of women's butts. Just really into them, into the shape, into the jiggling, like kind of the bigger the better. It's beautiful and it's erotic, and I can just look at a nice butt and get excited. I've never fallen in love with a woman, but I'm very turned on by their butts.
There's a lot to say there. Okay. Always, basically, like you've always been into women's asses, and so that really.
Okay. I think I don't remember the first time I noticed it, but it was definitely like mid-puberty.
Okay.
Is there any male self-awareness feeling in this attraction, or does it seem completely like unself-aware and just target driven?
That's why it's really hard to say, because
Right.
it feels target driven. I mean, I can just look at the video, like, you know, on the Facebook reels of the gym videos of the women with the like big, very well endowed asses, and they're just like jiggling everywhere. And I was like, whoa, I am having feelings.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about what I would do to it. It's just, look at it go.
And just to be more pointed, the feelings are like in your genitals.
Yeah, aroused.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So that makes sense. So like this identification came from the fact that you experienced physical arousal from aspects of women, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you take us briefly through this interim period of time in your life where you thought maybe you were a lesbian?
Yeah, so I was maybe about 12. I think it was probably the beginning of 7th grade. I was already drawing like pornographic stuff. I was drawing like two boys like making out or like touching each other's penises. I started that very, very early, and I don't quite remember the logic, but I remember someone asking me, "So does this make you a lesbian?" And I had to think about it, and I was like, for a little while, I was like, I mean, I guess, because I'm not. This is clearly not straight behavior. But
So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so they were aware that you were drawing male on male porn, and they asked if that made you a lesbian.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. I was like, how? Okay, but how does that make sense?
It's interesting how some of this stuff is evergreen. Some of the stuff that we can't even wrap our heads around is still present. Like we've been talking about on Twitter, of like all of these lesbians who produce male on male, I don't know any of the proper words for drawn pornography and stuff like that. But the person who asked you that seems not to be the only person who conceptualizes that as gay. And I think there really is, like, culturally, if you're not in the weeds with all of this stuff, anything off is not straight, so therefore it's gay, right? Like we see this with other like AGPs that we've spoken to, who people speculate about whether or not they're gay, and they're like into women, right? But so anything that we read as like atypical, I guess, does kind of get, the only other framing we have for it is gay. And it's like you said, it's like, well, this is not straight because it's not a man and a woman together. And so like, even though it's not women, and that's theoretically what female homosexuality should be, or is, people don't, that's the only framework they have to conceptualize it seems.
Yeah.
And I just can't understand. Like we were recently having this discussion on Twitter, or someone quote tweeted me and about the lesbians enjoying male on male porn, and there were lesbians responding like, "Oh yeah, we they draw it, they consume it, this male on male porn." And then when people go, why are you doing this? The answer is that basically, oh, there isn't that kind of artwork depicting like female bodies, and it's like, but you yourself are drawing it. draw the women bits. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
there also just is artwork,
right
yeah.
Yeah. But the question is, they're the ones who are making this art, and
right.
Then you're like, why is it men? And they're like, because the art doesn't exist for it. Like you're saying, it does. It also, if it didn't, that's what you should be drawing. You're creating this, like,
right.
Anyway, does not make any sense. Yeah.
No.
Except as AAP. But.
Right. Right. Yeah. Laura Becker also said that, sorry if I repeated this already, if I said this already in this conversation, but that she was like, super straight, basically no attraction to women. And yet even, her family and people around her were asking if she was a lesbian because of her style. And so, Aaron and I get in a lot of trouble with our gay GP and our gay autosexuality theories, basically. And we're not even necessarily saying, we're saying a couple different things, basically, but we're not even necessarily saying that these people are literally gay or are the same thing as a homosexual member of their sex. But that like gay might be a phase for them, as in an identity that they take on to make sense of their experience temporarily, while they're figuring this out, and or might end up homosexual in their behavior because of the sort of sex dysphoria and euphoria aspects, right, of their sexuality. And so it is interesting, like you say, you never really had that opportunity with a woman to see what that type of sexual experience would be like. And I do wonder, because of what you've said about it really being about having a functioning penis for you, if maybe that wouldn't work for you. But I really do think that that it's just not that hard to conceive of someone in your position wanting to have sex with women.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like my anatomical focus kind of makes me maybe a little bit of an outlier. I had a point that I was going to make with that, and I forgot what it was. But as soon as a woman, well, I was 17, so girl started treating me as a man, as though she really thought I was a man, I was super into it immediately. And I think maybe my lack of androgyny in real life may have played a part into why I could never fall into lesbian, like butch lesbian. Even in theory, it's because I was way too feminine looking, and it didn't even present itself as an opportunity to be treated like I might be a boy.
Was your style ever like, what was your style like growing up and now?
It was growing up, I guess kind of just like gothic. For a while, gothic or like anime inspired. And it got a little goofy in my 20s. Now it's kind of settled back. I have wanted to cross dress. I haven't had many opportunities because I do not pass. And it just
it's only worth it to you if you would look like a man.
Yeah. I'm way too many curves. There's just no way. And it's unflattering on a body like mine to try and emulate a male fashion sense. So it just makes me look kind of just Pat. Do you remember the SNL character?
No,
It's
but
not flattering. Not flattering.
I was just thinking, I mean, there's so many butch identified women who do, fit this description. You're basically saying, they're quite curvy, not particularly tall. They just have short hair and wear men's clothes, but otherwise they completely look like any other feminine woman physically. But it sounds like for you, I guess, again, this is where we get into that territory. Are we talking about AAP or are we talking about, AGUMP? It's a fine, like the difference there, right? It's like if they're happy being, or they feel much more satisfied being, a masculine presenting woman. Whereas for you, it holds no appeal whatsoever. Like you don't give a shit about being a masculine presenting woman. It's like, what's the point? You specifically, it's about being a man. If you're not a male, if you're not a man, then the rest of it is just like, what's the point? But I think, for others, it's like, well, being masculine or presenting masculine is much of the point. And so it doesn't matter to them so much that they have this, curvaceous female body if like they're projecting masculinity essentially. So I think that could be, where the difference is there between
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I've almost like come up with a hypothetical in my head that I wonder, like, it sounds almost like you would rather wear a push-up bra and a tight-fitting gown and stilettos if you would be read as a trans woman. Like if you would be read as like a male in hyperfem than reading as a woman in men's clothes.
Okay, yeah, that does make sense.
And that might not be true, but that's like the extreme hypothetical that I'm thinking of is like if wearing like full on high femme clothing was guaranteed to have you read out on the streets as a male, as a man in a dress, let's say, something to that effect.
Would that appeal?
Would that appeal to you more than dressing like a man but being read as a woman in men's clothing?
So yeah, about halfway. I've definitely dressed myself up and taken pictures with the strap just hanging there, and it's the fact that like kind of relatively like attractive as a woman. I mean, I don't actually feel relatively attractive, but for some of the pictures, it's like, okay, you pose it just so it doesn't look half bad. That's kind of more important than like words. Yeah, than like dressing like a man and completely failing to embody any of it. Just looking like a pudgy lesbian doesn't do it. But if I'm like curvaceous push-up bra and a big cock, that's better.
Okay. And even without the big cock, like you'd rather be read basically as like a conventionally attractive woman than as a what did you say, a pudgy lesbian or something?
Yeah, that's right.
Sense.
Well, what I'm reading here actually, Tali, is that I don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, for you it doesn't really matter what you're read as out in public, because it's completely confined to the sexual role, to sex itself. So it's like it doesn't matter what people are observing of you, like how you are out in public. You keep your fetish to yourself. Obviously I was joking, but like that's what everybody's all worried about. It's like you're performing the fetish in public. It's like, but for really, it doesn't matter what you're wearing out in public or what people are perceiving of you if you're not fucking them, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Correct? Okay.
And although when I was thin enough to actually be androgynous, I did dress in a lot of boys' clothes, and I really liked that out in public. And I'm pretty sure I did get mistaken for a boy once or twice, and that was like, wow.
Okay. So it's more like it just feels
what if could.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's something to be said about like we don't know all the different factors at play that contribute to like how different everyone's presentation is with all of this. But there's something to be said for people like you and people like Phil who would if could, you know, like if your skeleton allowed for you to more easily pass as androgynous or pass as masculine, then you would feel maybe more incentivized to try to do that. But it doesn't, and so you don't allow yourself to sit with that too long, right? You just kind of carry on and get on with your day. And I think like, and there's a lot of people who will say, well, not everyone can do that. And like, sure, yes, because again, there's all these other different factors, but we don't really know. There doesn't seem to be a clear recipe basically for any of this stuff. And so I think people like should try to lean into that if they can, you know. And I think even like even if it doesn't like perfectly make you feel better, I think it's always preferable to like accept our circumstances as much as we can, especially like especially understanding the limitations that even if you lean into transition, it might not give you exactly what you want. There are certain things that are going to just completely out of your control, out of anyone's control when it comes to their own individual transition even.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'd look like my dad, and that is not where I'm interested in going. So
yeah, I think it's really good to have this kind of pragmatic attitude. It's like this is what I ultimately desire, but it's not at all feasible or achievable. So, you know, let's not dwell on it. So yeah, I think that's a really the best way to go with this inconvenient sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that with my wife too, like because my wife does have dysphoria, you know, like it's not she more fits what we were saying before of like it would be easy to ignore the sexual aspect of it because the sexual aspect is just the sort of obligate AG or AAP, right? Where she needs to see herself as a man to be having any type of presence. But you know, like she does experience the like mirror avoidance, you know, just like kind of disappointment with you know her physical body and her femaleness, but she also very much feels like she can't she's she can't get what she actually wants, you know, in so many ways. And so like I've gone back and forth with, I think, you know, there's certain people who have tried to insinuate that, you know, like that I'm sort of preventing my wife from transitioning in some way, but it really is she really on her. I mean, first of all, she went the first 30 something years of her life before ever coming out to me when she first, you know, started a social transition and stuff. And so yeah, it's like it is what it is. And she is aware that she won't be able to get what she actually really wants. And also that, like, you know, like she doesn't want to be a really hairy man, right? And so, like, going on testosterone with that being like, she wants to masculinize and also probably would necessarily want all of the things that come with masculinization. And so, we don't need to like you know, it's I'm sure it's not easy to be someone like you or someone like Phil. There's that sadness, I imagine, right? But that you're not gonna can't kind of have really what you would ideally want. But it's not a life of suffering, inherent suffering either. Like there is just I think there can be just peace that comes with acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I land is just I've made peace with it. I'm not thrilled, but it is what it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. What are you gonna do?
Right.
One way that I kind of just kind of realized how kind of ridiculous I was being when I was in the trans medicalist mind frame where I had this terrible disability. I was supposed to be male, and that's just been withholden from me. And anyway, is to like think about people who have born with actual severe disabilities that actually inhibit their daily functioning and mobility and things like that. And it's like, okay, yeah, if I can't have exactly what I want, if I'm uncomfortable about this, or what, it's like in the grand scheme of things, there are much worse hands to have been dealt than like in your case or mine. It's like yeah, so we don't have this this immensely fulfilling sex life we would like to have because of this physical limitation. It's like, yeah, there are just worse things that could have been befallen us. And yeah, and it goes back to also the great thing that Taff was saying last week. It's like, rather than framing this thing as like this this burden or this debilitating affliction, rather frame it in terms of like, we were born at a time where we get to express our sexuality and live out these fantasies or whatever that would have not been not possible 20 50 years ago. And so yeah, just kind of try to reframe things in that kind of like positive, I get to experience the sensual gratification rather than I have been burdened with this horrible affliction. Just kind of twisting it like that.
Yeah, I like that.
She said it much more eloquently than I did.
She did, but it brings me back to the beginning of this conversation too, Phil, with what you were saying of like sort of thank God that you have these online spaces as an outlet right now, right? Again, it's like we could frame it as like, oh, poor me, I'll never really be a man, I'll never have a working penis, I'll never be able to properly express my desires and feelings. But also a couple decades ago, you could have had, like you said, just female arousal is not necessary, right? Like for her role in life. And so that could have been your lot, like a perfectly average, fine, just not very gratifying, not very sexually gratifying life. And so yeah, they're looking at it, looking on the bright side, right? And sort of just being grateful for the fact that we live in a time with such excess and ability to indulge in these things.
That's kind of the conclusion that I always come to, is like, you hear a lot of people saying that, is porn responsible for these like trans awakenings? And I always come back to the same question, like, okay, maybe they wouldn't have discovered the thing they were into without being, having it demonstrated in pornography, but what would they be saddled with otherwise? I sincerely doubt that a perfectly healthy sexuality is what they were saddled with before the porn. It's like, okay, they were just probably, I mean, for me, just feeling kind of weird about it.
That's a very good point.
Until I found what I was into, it was just a lot of urges and no place to put them. Very frustrating.
Yep. That's a good point. It's like, yeah, maybe they would not have found this, or learned about this facet of their sexuality if it weren't for pornography, but they would not be having a satisfying sex life in the absence of that knowledge. So it's not like, this porn has robbed them. One. Right. Yeah. So it's not like this porn robbed them of a normal heterosexual, relationship, which is what people seem to be most concerned about. But it's like, it could be that it awoken it, but I'm not sure that there was anything, enjoyable or functional in the absence of it,
Right. It's like, how much did porn really deviate the plan for any one individual? And I mean, not to minimize it too much, because there's a lot of crazy porn out there, and some people really do seem to, like, all these words are fraught, but seem to have an addiction insofar as, like, it's taking up a tremendous amount of time of every single one of their days, like that's like with any type of indulgence in that manner, right? It gets to a point where it's interfering with your functioning, with your regular functioning. But yeah, for those exceptions, obviously you could say that might derail someone from what would have been a healthier path. But it kind of gets back to what I was saying in the beginning about, like, the lesbians or bisexual, gay leading bisexual women who, it's like, did being with a woman turn them gay? No, but it unlocked this, like, more satisfying, more exciting in some way sexual gratification.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think is going on. I really don't buy into the whole porn sick narrative. I think if you do get that into something specific in porn, that was the thing you were going to be into, whether you realized it or not.
Yeah, right. And with all of these things, it's like, it's easy to say that porn causes this, or the trauma causes this, until you are then you're faced with the trans person, the autosexual trans person, who has no history of trauma, no history of abuse, and grew up, in a super religious upbringing with no computer in the house and no access at all to any type of pornography, right? And they still, like you said, end up at that same place. Yeah. And it just goes, it's like, who the people making the porn, where do they get the idea for this type of porn, right? The thing that's going to stimulate this person. Like, obviously it's because it's stimulating other people too. It's just doing it for some people. And so, like you're saying, it's very likely that if it does it for you, that you're one of those people that it does it for, right? Not that it was created. Because I think too, it's also like, this narrative is just too easy, because sure, there might be things when people are watching porn, especially when they're young, certain things that they are drawn to and then they spend more time looking at. And it's easy to say like, oh yeah, it's the porn that came first. But presumably there's also things that pop up that they're like, oh, and they don't look at. It is the thing that is speaking to you. You know what I mean? It's right. You're scrolling past and it's not like you're beholden to everything that pops up on the screen and your arms are tied next to you. You know, you're going, no, not that. Oh, gross. And then, oh. And even if it's the uncomfortable, like, oh, why do I like this? That is still a distinct experience from like that, nope, gross. And no one talks about that, right? It's like, okay, you were really drawn to transformation porn, like, did you ever encounter a porn that you didn't like? Like probably there, Yeah,
that's a very good point. They do talk about it like it's Clockwork Orange style indoctrination into. It's like no, it's it appealed.
Right, like it's literal hypnosis. Right. Like it's you're just taken over and you're just like the movie on the screen. I have to imagine it's a more active process for most of these people.
I mean, there's been stuff that I've tried to like, and it's just like, nope, not doing it. And sometimes you see something and immediately you're like, oh, that's the thing. Yep, that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, anything you want to cover that we haven't covered?
I don't know. Did you guys have anything else in mind?
I got to everything that I had on my list.
Yeah, I feel like I got all my questions out, but it was really great getting to talk with you.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Cool.
Really good.
All right, any final words to the low dysphoric autoandrophiles out there?
I mean, find an outlet for it. And just, I mean, don't be afraid to indulge it when you have to, but don't, if you don't have to lean into a transition path, like probably don't, I guess.
Yeah, cosign.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, awesome. Sure. Well, thank you, Phil. Thanks for talking to us. And thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.